They laughed when Phoebe inherited the crumbling harbor sail loft on the wharf, a lonely fishing harbor along the New England shore, forgotten by the world. To her brother Beck, it was only collapsing timber rotting in the salt air, weathered to silver gray by a century of harsh, freezing Atlantic winter storms. Beck walked away with the family millions and the highly lucrative shipping lines. And the grand family shipping fleet docked securely at the coastal Massachusetts harbor. The grand harbor warehouses and dockyards were quickly signed away in dark ink. Vast shipping lines and valuable harbor warehouses fell directly into his greedy hands. $9 million walked out into the cold, misty December coastal harbor gray. Phoebe was left with only the dusty, quiet harbor sail loft on the wharf. They had laughed at the silent, forgotten younger sister standing on the dock. 16 days later, she pried loose a single rotting pine floorboard in the loft. Beneath the wood lay a handwritten 1898 harbor navigation chart and a brass sextant. Soon, the Smithsonian Maritime History Collection wired her $4.3 million. For hidden in the dark floorboards lay pouches of gold coins and maritime charts. A maritime mystery kept silent since 1898, known only to the local shore. The 1898 Maritime Chart Archive named her great-grandfather the savior of the harbor. She used the massive fortune to restore the collapsing harbor breakwater and docks. She paid off the heavy village debts, saving the local fishermen from bankruptcy. A heavy burden of debt lifted from the coastal Massachusetts harbor at last. 16 days passed, the telegraph wire humming with news of the saved harbor. Only then did she understand the true maritime inheritance her father left behind. Join our journey, subscribe, and tell us where in the world you watch from. We cherish seeing how far these quiet tales travel across the distant seas. She spent her life restoring the crumbling harbor sail loft along the New England shore. She wore her only black dress, layered with her grandmother's faded linen shirt. He sat in the charcoal Audi, the silence heavy and cold between them. The attorney, Mr. Hartwell, was 71, the age her father would have been. The quiet room held its breath on that cold, gray December morning. The millions of the Boston portfolio and shipping lines all passed to him. Beck's silver pen traced the long lines of the family shipping fleet inheritance. To my daughter Phoebe, I leave the historic harbor sail loft on the wharf, and every single historic maritime item left inside its old weathered walls. He left her the sail loft, he muttered, the old shed on the wharf. Beck glanced down at the old wooden watch ticking quietly against his wrist. He had waited 14 long years for this single, quiet moment to arrive. In just 34 minutes, the quiet, life-altering transaction was completed in silence. Through every Saturday and summer afternoon, she kept the young girl close by. For them, this harbor sail loft was the only place that truly mattered. After the autumn he turned 10, Beck never stepped inside the sail loft again. The heavy wooden door of the sail loft remained shut, untouched for years. For 14 years they shared only a few hundred words in the quiet house. Something vital left him then, never to return to the cold, quiet harbor. Her childhood was split in two. The dark years she merely endured alone. A legacy passed down through 4 generations of dedicated harbor sail loft keepers. At 29, he walked back down to the historic coastal Massachusetts Harbor Road. He raised the heart pine beams and weathered cedar, building a harbor sanctuary here. In the autumn of 1898, a simple navigation chart sealed their first bond. Lahi had patiently taught her the quiet, maritime secrets of their harbor trade. Alongside the precious maritime goods, stored safely away from the cold harbor winds. On quiet Saturday mornings, children watched the tall ships glide into the busy harbor. Locked away in heavy oak chests, wading through 100 harsh Atlantic winters. Handwritten navigation charts and brass instruments rested safely inside the heavy canvas bags. The heavy canvas does not yield easily. Your hand must move slow and steady. 11 maritime charts were carefully rolled, and the wooden lockers restocked with care. She showed her the ruined canvas batch, damaged by the salty harbor spray. In the dark shadows, the precious navigation charts mingled with common shipping logs. But if the ink faded further, the magic of both shipping lines would vanish. If these navigation charts are mixed, the damage is done in secret at sea. Once a ship is lost to the deep, it can never be brought back. No flawed navigation charts would ever guide vessels through the harbor channels again. Countless captains and sailors once rested their hands upon this ancient loft counter. "Lay your palm flat on the worn wood, little one," she whispered softly. A rough, unworn corner marked where only the youngest cabin boys could reach. By 15, the entire harbor sail loft belonged to her quiet, capable hands. Sorting the shipping manifests and packing navigation charts for the distant fishing fleets. Her weathered hands sorted old maritime charts, whispering stories of the Atlantic trade. On his final day, silent tears fell upon the worn wooden loft counter. It was a bittersweet memory she would return to, time and time again. The harshest winter in 30 years battered the harbor and threatened the fleet. The old captain, at 66 years old, faced the end of his legacy. Every fishing vessel would receive the navigation charts they needed for the spring. Alongside a historic brass sextant and heavy pouches of glittering gold coins, the Smithsonian Maritime History Collection acquired the charts, saving the village from bankruptcy. She spent the rest restoring the crumbling harbor sail loft along the New England shore. A simple maritime log, carrying names that would change everything along the wharf. Only much later did she understand what they had hidden in the harbor. Why sail when modern steamship lines could easily transport all the coastal cargo? When a sailor charts historic waters using her grandfather's ancient harbor navigation map, carrying that exact, precious, handwritten navigation chart inside his weathered wooden dory, the historic harbor navigation charts are for them. That is the final trade. The handwritten 1898 harbor navigation chart was a fading memory of the sea. She rested in the small caretaker's quarters behind the historic harbor sail loft. He laid his mother to rest in the quiet cemetery overlooking the harbor. They told young Phoebe, gently but firmly, that the shipping fleet was gone. Old oak maritime chart chests faded slowly into the shadows of the loft. She was ordered to leave the coastal Massachusetts harbor by April, without choice. When Wednesday came, she finally began her journey down to the frozen wharf. 7 long years had passed since she last stepped inside the sail loft. Taken down by Edmund on the morning they buried Lottie near the shore, she slipped the brass sextant close to her heart, inside her heavy jacket. She stepped outside, her boots crunching against the frozen gravel of the wharf. With a heavy click, the iron padlock gave way, releasing its long hold. Inside, the old harbor sail loft remained, frozen in the amber of time. A heavy wooden rope barrel stood silent guard against the weathered loft wall. 47 brass key hooks gleamed faintly, dedicated to the fishing families of old. Shallow grooves marked the floorboards where generations of sailors once stood waiting. And the chill of winter sea mist rising softly through the loft floorboards. Her leather boots and woolen socks lay abandoned on the worn loft threshold. In her body, she remembered the ancient warmth hidden within the ship timber, and the deepest depression of all, where George stood overlooking the harbor for decades. Her flat palm rested gently on a single, worn floorboard of the loft. When he laid this loft floor in 1898, he hid a secret beneath. He told me the secret on his very last night overlooking the harbor. Phoebe was only 10 then. For 16 years, the maritime memory faded away. A tiny iron ring, crossed 1,000 times by her bare feet, remained unnoticed. The thick heart-pine board groaned, yielding to her strength above the quiet harbor. The faded metal box bore a name and a year, etched in time. With trembling hands, she lifted the heavy tin box from its dusty hiding place. The heavy oilcloth fell away, revealing the handwritten 1898 harbor navigation chart inside. The Smithsonian Maritime History Collection acquired the 1898 navigation chart and brass instruments. The pouches of gold coins and maritime chart archive would save the fishing village. With these funds, they restored the collapsing harbor breakwater and the fishermen's docks. Hidden beneath the brass sextant lay a faded sepia photograph from 1898. Tucked beneath the image, a folded, yellowed maritime clipping waited to be found. Of gold given freely, paying off village debts when hope was all lost. She sank to the cold pine floor, looking out at the saved harbor. The sail loft would stand quiet until your father gave it to you. He built all of this with his coastal Massachusetts harbor shipping line's money. For all these years, I have kept that promise to protect the wharf. But this hidden box remains safe, containing the key to the shipping fleet. The words on the page were final. The harbor sail loft was hers. She walked to the workbench where sailmakers had stood for so many decades. Her palm rested against the worn wood, feeling the history of the wharf. She spent the fortune restoring a crumbling harbor sail loft along the New England shore. It told the story of the grueling 14-week voyage by schooner through icy waters. The historic sail loft, standing proud against the shadow of the coastal Massachusetts harbor. The old harbor warehouses, watching over the busy wharf at the historic fishing harbor. A final quote from the old captain spoke of a quiet savior of the harbor, a June auction on the wharf, and the remnants of a life sold away. Phoebe read the faded maritime newspaper clipping once more, her eyes lingering in silence. She turned her gaze back to the dark hollow hidden in the loft wall. She set the heavy wooden hatch aside, resting it on the worn loft floor. A narrow flight of stone stairs descended into the quiet dark beneath the wharf. Marked with an anchor and compass, the brittle wax held its maritime secret. At the bottom lay a hidden room, carved from the ancient harbor seawall. Row upon row of weathered maritime chart chests lined the dusty wooden shelves. A handwritten 1898 harbor navigation chart, carried from the shadows of the outer reef. Every few decades, careful hands preserved these charts to guide ships through the harbor. The amber light brushed against the vast, forgotten 1898 maritime chart archive in the dark. For over a century, these silent stone walls had kept their deep maritime secrets. With trembling, reverent hands, she slowly began to unwrap the weathered oilskin cloth. It traced the shipping lines of 187 lost family vessels. This chart held the living heritage of the historic New England shore and harbor. She turned away, slowly climbing the cold stone stairs back into the loft. She stood frozen on the worn loft floor, lost in the quiet shadows. The heavy oak door of the office creaked open, welcoming her into silence. There stood the old captain's desk, untouched for 45 long years in the loft. Resting on the worn green leather pad was a single, solitary parchment envelope. Inside lay the deed to the crumbling harbor sail loft along the New England shore. And finding the harbor sail loft means you have uncovered the hidden floor cavity. This official letter bore the grand stamp of the Smithsonian Maritime History Collection. Yet, this historic 1898 harbor navigation chart holds a far greater maritime secret. Long ago, your grandmother and I sold our last pouches of gold coins. We used the quiet fortune to pay off the debts of the fishing village, restoring the collapsing harbor breakwater and docks that threatened the fishermen with bankruptcy. These harbor warehouses and dockyards are yours now, just as your grandmother wished. I only wish I had spoken more to you while I still could. Phoebe sat in silence at the weathered desk, lost in the harbor's chill. With a heavy heart, she slowly rolled the wooden desk shut against the wind. Monday arrived, and she set out along the wharf toward the town bank. For 33 years she ran the bank, now weighing these historic gold coins. Without a word, she signed the receipt, sealing their deep and unspoken understanding. 2 days later, a mysterious archive van arrived through the thick coastal fog. Heavy leather ledgers whispered secrets of historic voyages long forgotten by the town. $4,300,000 to keep the Maritime Chart Archive whole forever. Yet, she would keep the original 1898 harbor navigation chart close to her heart, along with a master copy of the Maritime Chart Archive in the sail loft. This dockyard inheritance secured the future of everything yet to come in the harbor. She spent 12 hours capturing ghosts preserved in the dust and salt-weathered wood. We searched for all the hidden harbor warehouses scattered across the coastal Massachusetts harbor. $1 million legacy secured the fishing village's future for the next 10 years. 7 years of harsh coastal storms had stolen the sail loft's roof tiles. The cold iron stove stood silent, waiting for a new pipe against the draft. She spent her fortune restoring the crumbling harbor sail loft along the New England shore. She carefully replaced the shattered glass of the sail loft's high harbor window. 3 coats of polish brought the ancient oak of the sail loft back to life. In the cold of January, she sorted the handwritten 1898 harbor navigation charts. She rescued the brass sextant and old charts before the harbor agents arrived. The next Sunday, Royal arrived carrying a small cast-iron stove for the loft. "Just bring me a cup of hot coffee while I work on the wharf." Across the frozen harbor waters, the church bell struck 11 into the cold night. On the table, the empty brass sextant box sat in the quiet shadows. January 28th marked the first Saturday of a brand new harbor season. Every Saturday morning, Mr. Royal Hartwell made his faithful journey to the wharf. Sitting at the worn workbench, he poured a single steaming cup of coffee. By the second year, the Smithsonian Maritime History Collection noticed their quiet archive, a place to preserve, study, and return these historic maritime charts to the world. At the worn workbench, they agreed to the terms that saved the fishing village. In the cold winds of March, the first transaction cleared, restoring the breakwater. In the cold winds of March, a maritime historian arrived from Boston Harbor. The tale began with a grandfather, lost along the stormy New England shore. George was once a young captain, chosen to lead the family shipping fleet. Together, they prepared to face the long, quiet cycle of winter harbor Saturdays. He bought the old sign at the shipping line's estate sale in 1949. Soon, a national maritime journal shared her story of saving the fishing village. By the second autumn, she found comfort in simply watching the harbor tides. Along the wharf, the autumn sunset burned with the deep crimson of mid-October. Yet she could see his hands, sorting historic navigation charts across the workbench. She remembered when she spent everything on a crumbling harbor sail loft along the shore. Until at last, the historic maritime legacy rested safely in her own waiting palms. Counting out 23 copper pennies for sea biscuits on a weathered oak counter. And then, 7 long years after the old woman passed away in the harbor, suddenly, we understand the deeper maritime truth she had been teaching us all along. It is a memory the 1898 Maritime Chart Archive keeps, waiting for the sea. She taught us that the coastal trade is, above all, a matter of patience. It is the hand that learned the tides and the hand that comes after. Sometimes, it is the hand that quietly gives back to the struggling fishing village, paying off village debts and restoring the collapsing harbor breakwater to save the fishermen. Her brother inherited the millions and the grand family shipping fleet and dockyards. He took the Boston wealth and the grand estates along the Cape Cod shore. A lonely sail loft stood against the dark, crashing waves of the harbor. He claimed the vast harbor warehouses and the grand family shipping lines instead. He took everything that could be measured with gold and silver coins on land. He laughed at the humble harbor sail loft as he walked away forever. Yet, the true maritime trade slipped quietly through his greedy, unyielding fingers. He could never possess the quiet, seafaring wisdom of the old harbor grandmother. The historic harbor docks and collapsing breakwater remained far beyond his selfish reach. Left untouched on the dusty auction block of a faded coastal June afternoon. Nor did he find the handwritten 1898 harbor navigation chart and brass sextant, hidden safely away in the dark, silent rafters of the old sail loft. But she never expected the Smithsonian Maritime History Collection to reach out next. At 26, Phoebe stood entirely alone, mourning the old captain she had lost. With only a single dollar left to her name, her coastal future was uncertain. She spent it on a crumbling harbor sail loft along the New England shore. It was a small, crumbling harbor sail loft resting along the New England shore. Yet it would become the best dollar she would ever spend in the harbor. If this coastal tale touched you, share it with someone who needs it today. Has anyone in your family ever quietly carried a kindness for another soul? A secret kept close, hidden away from the world in the old loft. Share your forgotten maritime tales with us in the shadows of the wharf. Until our paths cross again on the quiet, mist-covered docks of the harbor.